So this diptych was also inspired by work that I did, research I did while I was in New Brunswick at the Kingsbury International Residency for the Arts in 2019. And just serendipitously, while I was thinking about rag yards, an acquaintance of mine, Melissa Ferreira, who ran a company called Adhesive Clothing here in Vancouver for, I think, almost 20 years. She's just recently relocated to Germany, but her Instagram account showed this incredible picture of a rag yard. Now, Melissa actually worked in rag yards for a number of years, and her pieces of clothing take materials that she finds in rag yards, and she upcycles them. So a very signature piece of hers is a sweater that's made out of at least a half a dozen other sweaters. I really loved the composition of this photograph, and I did create a pattern that included like every one of these little lines, and then very quickly realized that it wasn't something I was going to be able to hook, because I just sort of don't hook on that scale. Either that, or I was going to have to make the piece like wall sized, and that wasn't really where I wanted to go with it. So the floor here is, on this piece, is hooked. And then there is a combination of machine and hand stitching in these bales in the background. And then the ceiling is also machine and hand stitched. And there's a bit more hooking here. And of course the forklift is hooked. It really needed to be, to sort of jump out. And then this part here, these bales that are in the foreground, this is waste product. So in another video, I talked about how I made one of the rag bales out of quilting cotton. And I was ripping the fabric to make the strips that I could hook for that project. And of course, you're just like sitting in one place, like doing something for a long time. And I've got all my yellows. And I look down, and I'm not just ripping the strips, but I'm also cleaning them so that they hook better. And you don't want little extra threads because they just kind of get caught on the hook, and it makes it, I don't know, I guess less satisfactory and less enjoyable to hook if you keep getting caught up on that kind of stuff. So I was stripping the threads off, and I looked down and I had this like beautiful gossamer pile of glowing threads, very fine texture, and all different shades of yellow. And I was like, that is too pretty to put it in the garbage. And I started saving them, having no idea what I would do with them, but I just couldn't really quite bring myself to get rid of them. And they turned out to be perfect for this. So this is actually waste product from my own process, incorporated in here. I also got to start using some new materials and techniques to do this hand stitching. I used something called water-soluble embroidery stabilizer, which is this really cool product. You just kind of lay it, you draw your pattern on it in like pencil. You can just use pencil and pin it down and hand stitch it. And then when you pour water over it or when you soak it, the stabilizer just washes away. So that is a pretty magical, transformative process. And I do, in my Instagram history, have videos of that happening and of these colors sort of being revealed. So, and you can see that I use the same technique over here. But another material that I started playing with was artist transfer paper. I thought that it might be less time consuming and more interesting to transfer the image of the hooking and some of this hand stitching onto artist transfer paper and then put that onto fabric. And convinced of what I have heard called the inherent cussedness of materials, and how the job of a craftsperson is really to kind of struggle with that. There's so much potential in materials, but you often do struggle with the material to make it do what you want. And often in that process, you figure out that actually it's going to do what it wants, and you have to accommodate yourself to that. So I fought with this for a while, and then I kind of started figuring out how to use it, and also I think to embellish it and how to put it together. And you can see at this point here, I think that I really decided to go with it. I'm like, I have seams in this, and I'm not gonna, at one point I had hopes of painting them over and sort of making them invisible. And I'm like, this is not what this is about anymore. I need to embrace what's happening here. And so I have cross stitching, and there's something about a cross stitch which says like, okay, I'm really patching this up and holding these things together by the force of stitch. So those lines in the ceiling are clearly where I said, okay, I'm going to go with this. Because the colors didn't come out quite as much in the artist transfer paper, I started embellishing the bits of color. And I also decided with the floor that I wanted to embellish that too. I wanted to, in some cases, highlight where the pieces of transfer paper were coming together, sort of amplify the seams of this jigsaw puzzle that was this piece, but in other ways sort of draw attention to certain features that might get lost, like the skid marks down here on the floor, or the rag that had sort of somehow escaped being part of a bale. But again, the forklift is still hooked, and these beams are still hooked. And what I also really loved about this piece, eventually, after I had struggled with it for so long, was that, I guess I can play with this too, okay? Is that at first I had this piece, I knew I wanted to do the diptych, but at first I had this piece and it was really such a side view. But I didn't know, and I'm so glad that this show challenged me to realize this. Oh dear, okay. I'm not gonna be able to hang it now. Okay, here we go. Okay, was that when I had the two together, all of a sudden, the rag bales would jump out, and that I would get this wonderful X pulling the two pieces together. So this was in short, this was a real learning piece.